Okay, good. So we're going to start with, we're up to chapter 7. I think we finished the 6th chapter last time, didn't we? We did, yeah. 1 second. Yes, we did all that. Okay, so now what we've been clarifying here, or beginning to clarify, is the exact relationship between the human and our actions on the one hand, and all the worlds, namely the channels of Hashem feeding, Kedusha feeding holiness into the world. How exactly does it work? And we used the mashal, we used the analogy earlier of neshama, right? Like a soul to the, as if we're some kind of the soul of the world. But he's already pointed out it's not literal. Like our soul, let's say, or our mind has such total control over the body. It's not that we control consciously the worlds and things that are moving. So for atom inyan anal parakeh. So now we had the whole chapter 6, which was a long chapter talking about how essentially all the olamas, right, everything up there is being wired into us. So we've got a plug-in from all the different parts of all the different worlds and all the different things like that. That's what we've said so far. Now he's going to therefore say, okay, so good, but what is this relationship? So atom inyan anal parakeh. So now we're going to clarify what we said in the 5th chapter, specifically towards the end of the chapter. What does it mean that we're called the different types of soul of these millions upon millions of worlds? It's not literally a nefesh like ours is in the body, right? That can't be. So what is it? Now we're going to finally explain what's going on. Just like every detail of everything, how we flick the finger, how we do everything, right? It operates through everything from the consciousness and upwards, everything that we're going to call the soul. It's all happening first in the mind. Let's call it in the mind, and perhaps deeper than that first. So the parallel is that literally every conscious movement we make first is in a direct expression of our will, our thinking, our deep intentionality, but down to details, how we twitch, there's obviously subconscious things as well, but in all the conscious movements. So too, is totally the effect of our causal action. So the parallel is the cause and the effect. The relationship's not the same. We're not consciously able to drive and say, okay, I'd like an olam to move this way right now. I'd like a channel of holiness to flow this direction, that direction. So from that perspective, it's different. But what's the same is that nevertheless, they don't move without us, right? In fact, Hashem has created the worlds so that nothing in those olamas, in those worlds and levels and layers and things, nothing operates independently and autonomously that doesn't reflect exactly what we're doing. So from that perspective, just like in our human body, every motion is a precise effect of mind, soul, etc., so too, in the olamas, everything is a precise effect of human action. Okay? So it's not the intention the relationship is not an intentional one in that sense, but it is a causal one. Okay? Fine. That's the point. Now, the reason is what he said before. Because we are made up of all these different things, because they're all wired into us, because we are an exact microcosm of all of these things, because they're wired into us, they are reactive to everything we do, right? And really, this is the point. If you remember what we said in the 5th, I think it was the 5th chapter, that the vision Yechezkel has of seeing the inner world, he sees a vision like a human. Now, exactly what that is, right? That's very, very, very deep secrets of Torah and whatever. But what it means is that on some level, at least, the root of the collective souls of Yisrael and of Adam, right? The root of these collective neshamas is the highest point in all these worlds. So yes, they're wired into us, but they're not wired into us like at the tail end at the bottom, so they all control us. What they're really wired into, what we are at the bottom, is a reflection of the highest. Our real root goes all, right, because they're all wired into us, the highest root in us is the same as the highest root in all of them, which means the root of all of them is also the root of all of us. which means our deepest part is actually literally the deepest part of all those worlds. And so as we activate that and move through that and do everything, then we're also activating all of them. Again, not in a conscious control way, but in a pattern of cause and effect. Okay. Fine. And therefore, so therefore we contain all of them. The reason, as we explained in the 5th chapter, is because of the root of the soul. It's the highest point and the deepest point in all the worlds. And the reason for that is what we said in the 6th chapter, because it is the oneness point, which is the highest point of the world, is the oneness point of us. And that is because we're plugged into all of them. Therefore, naturally, the highest point in us is the highest point in all of them. Okay. And this is why the only thing with free will is us. To shift ourselves and with us all the worlds to any side that we want. Okay? In other words, every movement we do moves all of them. Every decision we make impacts all of them. Now, we are no longer one being, right? We are billions of beings, and it just Yisrael alone is millions of beings, and each of them is wired into everything. So we might not have an immediate perception of exactly what we're doing, but it is nevertheless all the case that we're doing all that. What happens if a person, God forbid, has been damaged things and wrecked stuff in those worlds? And again, there's different words for different type of damage. Right? There's different ways in which we can limit the light that comes down. It could wreck equivalent of a pipework that conveys the light. There's different ways. Again, Alpim Kabbalah, all these things are made very precise. Even what we destroy, we can rebuild. And this is going to become a major part of his coming chapters. Okay? Is how does teshuvah work? If you destroy something in this world, you can't always rebuild it. It's a lot easier to destroy than rebuild. He's going to explain how teshuvah works. Basically, destruction is always limited, right? Things that are higher can rectify things that are lower. And so if you damage something, let's say through a physical action that's bad, so you can only physical action can only impact a certain level of height. So you can always use something that touches higher than where physical action goes to rectify and remedy things. And that's very, very important. Therefore, he's adding that now. Like he often does this. He adds a little bit now, just leaves it there, and then he'll develop it later. Right? When we learned the Tanya, we saw something very similar, although in a different way. A lot of Sfarim like this do this. They kind of drop in seeming side points that are really going to be very, very important for where they're going.
Right, okay. When we talk about these worlds, I always get like a bit confused because all different worlds in themselves. They're just like filters of our world, an expression before it. There's nothing happening there.
Well, so yes and no. A world is like a framework within which all of reality is expressed. So everything, like I gave the analogy very early on about like a computer program and a graphics thing. So they're like just the same thing being expressed in different layers. Okay, so all the things in this world have a deeper expression in an inner world that feels much closer to God. So there's some sense in which it's all in exact correspondence, and some sense in which things that you can see fully fleshed out here, if you were there in that world, you wouldn't see it fully fleshed out. You might not even understand what it is. That you might not even notice that there's these kind of different little subtleties, subtle tiny shades of something that, and when you get to this world, they all grow into, so you hardly notice the branch growing is going to turn into 55 twigs. I guess if you really knew in retrospect, you could see them there, but then they mature fully. So there's things in this world that wouldn't be obvious in the previous world, but they're really there. And even less obvious in the world above that, and even less obvious in the world above that. But they're all there. They're all absolutely there. They just, since you're closer and closer and closer to God's light, you can see less and less and less things differentiated from it, but they are all there in all those worlds. So it's not identical to the analogy of the program and the graphics. It's very similar to it, but it's not exactly the same.
Right. So why do they call it like a different world? If it's not really a different world. It's just like the same design, just like an earlier stage.
Okay, you could call it different. If you prefer the word stage to world, that would be fine. But the idea of a world is a self-contained framework within which every single object that exists is there. The objects, in a sense, are the same, but you're perceiving kind of a deeper root of them. The program is not really different to the graphics. Well, they are because you got the graphics element. But other than that, everything's exactly the same, right? But the way you see it will look totally different.
Yeah, and then something broken in the previous stage means that something will be broken on this world.
Right. And there'll be, and the flow of light between one world and the other will block altogether potentially. So it gets into that world. So there is a sense in which it could, right. This is where there is, again, we have to know where the analogy works and where it doesn't, right? The graphic. So I guess you could have a bug in the system between one of the graphics and the actual, between the program and the graphics, let's say, right? So then if you had a bug there, you'd have to rectify that. In other words, the flow between world to world can be interrupted. It is possible for it to be interrupted. Yeah. Now, the reason we don't want to use the word stage, I'll tell you why. Because within each world, you've got lots of stages. Right? So that's why we prefer to use the word world rather than the word stage. Within each world, you've got the 10 sephiros, right? So you've got different relationships between different midas that Hashem uses. And then you've got more spheres within spheres. So you got all 10 within all 10, and you've got permutations and levels, and you've got all the world. Truth is, you've got it's a very refracted system. You've got all the world. Each world has all the other, like a little kind of a mini map of all the worlds within it, and mini maps of all the spheres. So there's a lot more things that you could call levels. Okay? But the world's the same quantity of entities is theoretically there or should be there in all the levels. How they manifest, how much they mature, how much that may shift. But there are ways that it blocks between level and level. There are things that, yeah. Okay. Now, this is an amazing, typical kind of sort of how are these going to bring out over here. David HaMelech says in the Tehillim that we're saying at the moment every day, Hashem tzilcha al yad yaminecha, right? So Hashem is your shadow on your right-hand side, right? Or Hashem shades you, really is how we'd normally understand it. But just like the shadow of something, the shadow is exactly the effect of the cause, which is the motion of the human or entity that has the shadow. So now listen to this, when you think about it, not Hashem is shading or sheltering you, but Hashem is to some degree like your shadow. What does that mean? It means Hashem's manifestation is a shadow of you. But okay, obviously not Hashem in essence, right? But so what? But how's Hashem's manifestation? That's exactly how. Because the manifestation of Hashem is exactly all these worlds. And they are behaving like a shadow to us. As we move, they move. As we go back, they go back. So yeah. So now you use a very precise word. All these words, by the way, I'm often just glossing over them, but you can really spend time on the precise terms he uses. He's very precise, Rav Chaim of Volozhin, as are many other Torah writers, but he's particularly strong on the precision here. God is mischaber l'tois olamas. He connects himself to kind of give growth or life to the worlds. And he does it according to the rules of paralleling it with the way we behave. So yes, it's not that Hashem, again, this point keeps trying, it's not that Hashem has these laws that are independent of him doing all this stuff, or even the worlds are independent of him. But once he's creating the worlds, he operates them, he joins his light into them and shines it through them according to, as if it's the shadow to the body. Okay? But Medrash, she's now going to quote to Medrash. What does Hashem say to Moshe when he's telling him to go and speak to the Bnei Yisrael? Right, in Egypt, going, go and tell the Jewish people, Kishmi, what's the name? Right, the I will be who I will be. What does that mean? It means there's a parallel going right there. There's and another one, right? I will be and I will be. As you behave with me is how I will behave with you. The way you are with me, that's what I'm going to be with you. And the Medrash then quotes this pasuk. That's what David HaMelech says. Hashem, you're the shadow on my right hand. Ma Hashem tzilcha k'tzilcha, you're like the shadow. Ma tzilcha ma tamach lo b'sachek, you. If you laugh, your reflection or shadow laughs. You cry, who boicha kenegdecha? It cries as well. If you're angry, it's also angry at you. I think a reflection here is better than a shadow for this one, right? Your mirror image, whatever emotions you have at it, it has back at you. That's what the Medrash says. You behave positively to Hashem, Hashem's immediately behaving positively back, reflecting it back. You behave negatively to Hashem back. Which we're going to see this reflective pattern is going to be manifest in the Keruvim. Okay? Because we're going to see that, and that's going to really make its way in the next 2 chapters. Okay? This is going to be a very big piece of how the reflective principle works it. Now he quotes the Zohar and Tetzaveh, Kuf Beit Daled, Tachazi, Kamasiyam, Atatakayim, Kibla, Tadir. He talks about how the lower world is always ready to receive, whereas the higher world only gives as the person is. If he's standing with a good face, right, a shining face from below, then just like that, that's what they do from above. If he's in a negative state below, so same thing. And that's why we talk about Ivdas Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy. So there'll be kind of a simcha back to us, a love and a rejoicing coming from above. Okay. This is exactly the issue of the Keruvim. Right? That's this already from the Navi from Sefer Melachim, when Shlomo Melech builds the Keruvim, right? These 2 golden things on top of the Aron. And it could be there was also more, right? Remember the Gemara could be the Keruvim of Shlomo had another one on top. But okay, I had a Keruvim Shlomo Ksiv Gufneim Labais. Now, so we got one description of them being Ishalachiv, facing one another, right? This is I think this is before Shlomo Melech actually builds the and then we have another one Gufneim Labais. They're not quite facing each other; they're facing inwards, and this is going to form the next chapter. Kamoshi Sparba as Hashem, like we're going to clarify. So let's start the 8th chapter. Here, behold, are you saying any questions on this? Okay. Now, Chazal are going to say, Binyan HaKeruvim. What do Chazal say? So this is a Gemara in Baba Basra, that's Tzadi Tes, right? The Gemara says the Aron doesn't actually fit in, right? It's like this transcendent space thing. Kate said, hey, no, how do they stand? Rav Yochanan, Rav Elazar. So they literally quote both of these different possibilities from the Pesukim. Panei Meshalachiv, right? They're facing exactly one another. So one of them, Chadam, one says they're facing exactly, Chadam Panei Labais, one says no, they're facing inwards, not directly to each other. Right? So what does the one who says that they face each other do with the pasuk in Divrei Yomim that says they're not facing each other? He says, like Kasha, that's not difficult. It depends on how we're behaving. The Keruvim reflect our relationship with Hashem. If we're behaving in a direct will of God, if we're committing our lives completely to God, then the Keruvim face each other perfectly. If we're not, Chasham, then they look away from each other. So it's like this spiritual, they're physical objects, but not obeying physical laws, and they're literally reflecting our state, and they can change, and that's why the Pesukim describe them differently. Ayin Rashi, right? See what Rashi says. So Rashi there contrasts the way that it's described, Pnei Labais, their faces, like in Divrei Yomim, from the way it's described when Moshe Rabbeinu makes them, says they're facing each other directly. And again, it says, right, explains that when Yisrael does the will, then they face each other directly, and to show Hashem's love for us and ours for Him. And that's the idea of Shekhinah should rest upon us. Whereas if we don't, right, so in other words, when they do the will, then so the default, I guess, they start not quite facing, but then they face miraculously, they turn and face each other. Okay, I don't know, Rashi goes to the whole description over there, fine. One second. Sorry, yeah. Or the man, according to the opinions of Pnei Bias, they're facing away from each other. What do he do with the description of it facing directly? They are not 100% directly. They're direct and not direct. They're kind of facing partly towards and partly away. And that's why he uses the two descriptions. Okay? Partly facing away from each other, partly facing towards. So why didn't we use the same answer? Why did the second opinion not say, also, depends if they're doing the will of Hashem or not doing the will of Hashem. It changes. Okay, I Rash Now, the second opinion says Rav Chaim cannot use the same answer as the first opinion. It depends if we're doing the will or not. Because on the first opinion, the Kruvim were really made facing each other. Then they miraculously turned away, and then they miraculously turned back again. But according to the second opinion, they were made lechatchila, not facing each other. Now, this is the fundamental, the most natural state of the Kruvim is facing away from each other. You can't make a sign, if it really was a distinction between here we're doing Hashem's will, here we're not, that means you originally built the Kruvim to look like you're not keeping Hashem's will properly. That can't be. So the first opinion says, no, they're originally facing each other. That could be saying yes, and that is the ideal. And that's what they're meant to be doing. But if they ever go away, then the Kruvim face away. The second opinion, I say no. Their course, it's made in an ideal form, but they're partially facing towards and partially away. Okay. Fine. That's exactly what Tosfos says in the Gemara there. One assumes that in the beginning they made it face the way that it sets up the ideal. Face to face. Okay, for one way or the other, let's go with the second opinion. They originally faced away from each other. Why did Shlomo Melech do that? Why didn't, I get that Moshe Rabbeinu made the Kruvim face each other, but why did Shlomo Melech lechatchila, why didn't he ideally make them face away from each other? Right? They haven't yet done Hashem's will or not done Hashem's will. What's going on? How can you say they're not doing Hashem's will before they're had a chance to do or not do Hashem's will? Why are you defaulting it and assuming they're not doing Hashem's will? Here we go into the Gemara in Brachos. He's now going to introduce a different machlokas, one that's very important, and he's then going to basically redefine what it means to be doing God's will and not doing God's will. It's not as simple as, we're all doing all the mitzvahs or we're all doing all the averas. It comes down to much more subtle things. So here we have the Gemara that says this. You should gather in, we say V'hayom Shemaya every day, you should gather in all your crops. Hanek, so one second. Yeah. Lefishanam and I says in Sefer Yoshua, right, the first chapter. Lo yomash Sefer Torah and you should never stop having the words of Torah in your mouth. Yachal dvarim kiksav, you might think literally that means spend the entire day reciting psukim or learning Torah. Talmud never sat to the ganecha, but the Torah now says itself, you've got to go and gather crops. So you got to spend time earning your food or getting your food in, right? You can't spend the whole time just learning Gemara or just learning Chumash. Rabbi Shmuel says you've got to do what the way of the world is. If that's how Hashem put you in the world, then that means he wants you to spend time in the field. That's Rabbi Shmuel. So what are you telling me? That we're going to go plowing when everybody in the world plows? That's months and months of work in the winter. And the Gemara is, we don't have the text here, but as we know, it carries on and says then you're going to reap in the time of reaping, etc., etc., etc. Torah Matayala, what's going to happen with Torah? If everybody's working the whole time, all year, fully for the crops, you're going to spend the whole year of work. You won't learn any Torah. And Rabbi Shimon says, when we do Hashem's will, our work is done by others. So nowadays, machines, right? When we don't, so you have to do it yourself. So he's saying, it's interesting, in Shema, and he's going to point this out, when we're saying if you do all the good things, you get the bracha, then you have to gather your work. And Rav Chaim is saying, the Gemara seems to be saying, that is called Yeah. Okay, fine. This called, sorry, sorry. This is called the time we don't do Hashem's will. Right? So we see, if we put the two Gemaras together, it would imply, so Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is saying that you only do Vos after the Ganecha. You only have to go out and gather your crops when you're not doing Hashem's will. So now we can begin to see Shlomo Melech could set up the Keruvim facing away from each other because they were on a level, but they were still farming, right? Okay, we need to understand what on earth is going on over here. What's the different interpretations? He's going to give it to us. He's going to explain. I don't think it's not all in this chapter. A lot of it's going to go into... actually, no, so I make a mistake. It is all in this chapter. No. It's not all in this chapter. No, it's not all. It's this chapter plus the next chapter. Okay. Now... This seems shocking. You're going to take the psukim in V'hayam Shemaya. You're not doing Hashem's will. What do you mean? Right? So what are you talking about? You got to love Hashem, serve Him with all your heart. That's not called not doing Hashem's will. That is doing Hashem's will. So how can you say that then what happens? What's your reward? Nah, that's when you're not doing Hashem's will. The Pasuk says when you're doing Hashem's will. What do you mean? The idea is that it's of course, Rabbi Shmuel doesn't mean, it's up to everybody who wants to just decide to just not do physical things, right? Right? Sorry, other way around. So for sure, Rabbi Shmuel doesn't mean that you do no Torah learning at all. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up, right? For sure, Rabbi Shmuel, when he says you got to go and you can't do Torah the whole time because you got to go and plow your field, for sure it doesn't mean it should be a 24/7 profession, right? VA bottle, more than that, he doesn't intend that even for 1 minute you should ever be completely devoid of Torah. Okay. Rabbi Shmuel with his very precise holy language hinted when he said, behave in them like the behavior of the way of the world, of Derech Eretz. Right, so what does he mean? Hanig imahem, right, or bahem? You should operate with them like the words. Again, we would normally just ignore that word and say it means like, what's the phrase? Hanig bohen, operate in them, the words of Torah would say it means operate together with them or operate the music, right? The words, now, right to them, with the words of Torah, at the little time, listen to what I say, a small time, right? He feels it should be a small amount of time, that a person goes through the daily parnasa, according to the amount of work needed, and the obligation to give life, right, for oneself or one's family or whatever. But in your inner mind, be thinking of Torah. So that's Hanig Bohender. Right, what did Rishmal say? If you took it literally and you spend the whole day learning, when are you going to go and do all your crops? So what is the possible? So what's he say? Instead, Hanig Bohender, do in them derech, but still in the words of Torah. But while you're thinking Torah, go and plow the fields, go and do all that kind of stuff. Okay. In Nissan and Tishrei, don't come before me. Why? Don't come to the base of Medrash. He says, go home. These months you should be home with your family. I don't want to see you in the base of Medrash. He didn't mean I don't want you to learn Torah. Your primary operational function is doing other things, but don't. Of course, you're meant to be learning Torah the whole time. Right, but Amru Shamar Be'asu etc. Bishmal. Now, what actually works out with Rabbi Shmuel? So the Gemara says many did like Rabbi Shmuel, but also beyond them in it worked. Many tried Rabbi Shimon Yochai's approach of only Torah. It didn't work. And many tried Rabbi Shmuel of working whilst thinking Torah. By the way, if your work involves you thinking, then obviously You can't steal people and cheat from them by distracting your mind. You have to, but in principle, if you're a shoe cobbler or doing some menial operational, whatever exactly it is, you can be thinking Torah, chazering sugyas while you're doing all that, right? Just, it's not the dominant, most conscious part of what you're doing, but of course, you need to do that. So you got Rabbi Shmuel who's saying work whilst thinking Torah. Rav Shimon bar Yochai is saying, no, just do Torah, right? And that's what's happening over here. Now, yeah, fine. Amru Sham Harbe Yasu, etc. Give Shmuel, but I also built a Harbe Yasu, Krab Shmuel. It didn't work. Hainu Rabbim Dafka, but it says Rabbim. Many succeeded the Bishmal and many failed with Rishon. You're right. For the masses, it's not really possible to have all of them or most of them being successfully able to be full-time thinking about nothing but Torah, speaking about nothing but Torah. That won't think about, let's say, the minimum, just a mezainis. Sorry, I said mezainis. The average person cannot go without at least some time contemplating how their parnos is coming through. Right? For them, they're on a different darga b'toch. They have to do different things. Any Torah that has no work with it will create problems. That's talking for the masses. But an individual knows about himself. So the person can just dedicate completely to Torah and avodah, serving Hashem. Hashem vaday shechavos mutelas alav shelo nifresh af man what mit Torah avodah lehesik parnasa chas v'shalom kedas Hashem meyachai. Right? For sure, a person who can not worry about parnasa at all, they should, says Rav Chaim of Volozhin, ideally do. So yes, Rabbi Shmuel is talking about the average normal person, and Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is saying a person who can make it work, which may be only a small minority, but is still an important group. Okay, so far we're clear? Okay, now in the pasuk itself, who might some mechlal pashas v'haya shekul na'ar Russian rabbim. Generally, you'll notice v'haya im shamaya is completely in the plural. Tishma'u al mitzvos Hashem, etc., etc. But in the exception is v'asafta dagonecha, which is singular. You singular shall gather your crops, etc. It's you singular. Yeah. So the hint here is the movement from plural to singular is reflecting a shift in our consciousness. If we move away from the we to the me, from the klal, from the serving the community or whatever, or the nation to ourselves, then we have moved into the destruction zone. And then, yes, we'll be gathering, but that's what's going on, he says. 1 second. Now in the Sorry, it's very tired there. So yeah, I lost. Sorry, I don't know. Did that come across coherently? I fell asleep for a moment there. Sorry, apologies. I hardly slept last night. Did that come across that sentence, or did I mumble?
Didn't hear that.
You didn't hear that? Okay, fine. So I can read that paragraph again. Right? Okay, so it's in the singular, not the plural. That's why he called it. You didn't do the will of God because you've moved. At the moment you've moved into the Parnasa world, to some degree you've let go of serving the Klal, and to some degree it's serving the self. Now, not everyone agrees with Rav Chaim of Volozhin. This can be a very strong line, but the point he's making really, really strongly is the Gemara calls that not doing the will of God. Of course, the person's in Shema doing the will of God, but it means there's levels of doing the will of God and there's doing the will of God, right? There's two different levels. You can be doing the will of God on one level, but not on another. You could be doing the level of not God, but there might be a level that's even more ideal for a human to reach that you're not on. That's in essence what he's saying. Okay. And therefore we're going to begin to see where this is going to angle, so you can have Kruvim partially facing and partially not facing. That's going to be part of the idea. Okay, let's just see how we're doing for time over here. What I'm going to do is finish. I'm going to try Belineda. Let's see if we. I think we can finish the main text. Let's skip the footnote for now. Now we know the kruvim are all one. That is to say, they're one of the two vessels in the Mishkan, in the temple, or later Beis Hamikdash, that have to be made out of a single piece of gold. The other's the menorah, right? Why do they have to be one? So no, that's not what he's saying here. That is true, but that's no way. Sorry. Sorry. That is true, but that's not the point here. The point he's saying right now is that Echad, one of the two kruvim, is hinting at HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the second one, Alisas Gulasai. So the relationship between the kruvim is a symbol of the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Yisrael. As we get closer or Chashalim further away, the miracle would happen that the kruvim would reflect that by facing directly or facing away from one another. If they're facing each other, that means that God is, as it were, facing it. If we're facing straight to God, and therefore Him to us, if they face directly to one another, if we're a little bit facing away, then so would be seen the exact same thing happen with the kruvim. If we turn the opposite direction to Hashem, in that moment the kruvim would turn away from one another. Now you'll notice something very interesting. Remember how he's already brought to us the analogy of the Beis Hamikdash and us earlier, right? He spoke about the idea of the base a few times. He spoke in the beginning about how do you destroy a Beis Hamikdash? You do it on the inside, right? Then he spoke about the idea that all the worlds are really like wired into to us to this, but therefore when we bring wrong things, we destroy them all too. Now we're getting into the kruvim. So again, these are things just paralleling each other all the way. In other words, the man-God relationship itself is the centerpiece of the Mishkan. They would open up the curtain. Right? If you looked from, let's say today where Har HaZeisim, Mount of Olives is, and you look straight through, there was all the doors could open up and you could see all the way directly to the Kodesh HaKadosh and the Holy of Holies. And on Yom Tov, they would pull back the curtain and people could see. And they were embracing one another. I didn't translate that earlier, but right. And they would say, look, see how beloved you are to Hashem. And then he quotes a Zohar that says again, when is it, in love, at the time the kruvim are facing one, etc., and facing to each other, since the kruvim are facing face to face, so all the colors, everything, basically everything moves, the world moves to tikkun, to rectification, etc. And then he quotes a Zohar also, I'm not going to go through it inside, the little bits of in Acharei Moshe V'Sachem Gam Yachad, the sitting of brothers together. The idea again, when the kruvim are facing to each other, then that's called how wonderful it is. And then he quotes a Zohar Chodosh, going back, summing up what he's been saying before, and Ivda Hashem b'simcha, serve Hashem with joy. Right at the time when Yisrael are pure, the kruvim are connected to each other, and when they sin, they turn away from each other. And the kruvim says, right, that when we're pure, we face each other, etc., etc. This is the secret level. Our stoida say, right, the lashon using the Zohar is al-razin elain in the Hebrew translation. In these secrets, Yadei Yisrael, like you can see whether to what level we connect Hashem. You should see the Zohar over there. Fine, very good. So he's beginning to set up the answer, but he hasn't fully developed everything yet. What we've got so far is that the kruvim's relationship to one another mirrors the relationship between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we got this different levels of called doing Hashem's will and not doing Hashem's will. Now let's just go quickly back to the footnote. Right? When we say in Vahaya goes from plural to singular, for the moment in which it's giving a bracha. If you, plural, all serve Hashem, then you, singular, will go out to your field and be successful. So you're doing Hashem's will, but not on the highest level. But in the first paragraph, Kriya Shema, everything is in the singular. In Vahaya, it doesn't say, it says, never says, so both. In Shema, it says, serve God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your resources. In Vahaya, when it's plural, is v'chol levavachem with all your hearts, plural, v'chol nafshachem with all your lives, plural, but it doesn't say v'chol ma'odechem with all your resources, plural. Why not? Because the first paragraph is completely in singular, second person singular. Now, v'yachid she'efsha Since it's talking to individuals, and individuals could reach that level, therefore the individual is literally asking you to try to serve Hashem with all your heart. And we know the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva says, the highest levels of this are not achievable to everybody. So it's not for everyone, but we're saying in the singular to say those who can should get all the way up, and every individual should climb as high as they possibly can. Fine. And that's what it says, Lo yomash sefer Torah zebicha, right? That the Torah should never leave your mouth. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is saying those who can make it work have to make it work. Literally. Therefore, that same thing can also be like in Mishnah Brachos. You could do every single penny you have, every single resource you have, but this is only appropriate for the person who can reach that level of total dveikus b'Hashem, total connection to God, total God connection. Giving for every penny you have means you don't work for the money, right? That's he's saying. Because that's taking some of the pennies for yourself. So that's why we write Abba Parashas V'haya now B'Lashon Rabbim, since V'haya Im Shemaya is speaking to the masses. Therefore, the masses must at least do enough work to earn their basic income. At least something. So then it cannot say serve God with all your ma'od, because it's expecting you to be working. Even if only, right, even a small percentage can, but the plural, when you're speaking to the klal, you have to always say working. It's when you speak to the individual that you can say you should go higher, right? You can set up a standard that ideally someone would reach. I, according to Shimon Bar Yochai, that's not the highest level. In calls agam ledidei loy mikru chashonim bazeh ein oisim essential makom kum shvanim atzmamat right. So if a person spends only a few minutes a day or a few hours a day on paranosa, but their basic majority of time is working in Torah, then we would say we would not call this not doing Hashem's will. Ways for the masses. So if the masses are basically spending a minimum amount of time, and as much as possible during that amount of time, they're thinking about the Torah and so on. And also Yiras Hashem. So Rabbi Shmuel, according to Rabbi Shmuel, that is what the masses need to do. They're arguing over what is the most ideal level for the masses. The Gemara concluded that many tried like Rabbi Shmuel and failed, many tried like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and failed, many tried like Rabbi Shmuel and succeeded, but they were actually having an argument over what's the general ideal state even for the masses. Okay, fine. Now, he hasn't yet linked all this together. So let's just sum up everything we've seen in these last two chapters, right? What we said is that we're studying the relationship between our actions as a kind of a soul and the impact on the world as a kind of a body. In the human being, we consciously will, how the hand just moves like that, flicks the fingers, twists it. It's all going to happen exactly. In the Olamas and all the worlds is exactly as reflective of us, although we're not consciously driving it in that sense. Then what we spoke about is the Keruvim, facing towards and away. And we've seen that in different Batei Mikdash, they would, Lechatchila, ideally build them, not in exactly the same way, but fundamentally they would face towards or away from each other, according to how much we're doing. So why would Shlomo HaMelech build them slightly, away from each other? And now we've begun, and we saw, because you're doing Ritzon Hashem Makom, God's will or not, and we thought, oh my goodness, Shlomo HaMelech setting it up so it should look like they're not doing God's will. No. There's levels of God's will, right? There's the God's will of the fellow who's working most of the time. The God's will of the person who's only in a complete state of consciousness of connection to God. Isn't that relevant for masses? Not relevant for masses. That's really Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Shmuel. And he's identifying and lining up that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wanted everyone to try and strive for the ideal of complete God consciousness. And Rabbi Shmuel is saying, no. Most people have to do some work. Right, but the point is that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai calls that not doing Ritzon Hashem, God's will, right? So we can already begin to see at least Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would work, and we've begun to line up this idea of the Kruvim miraculously turning towards or away from one another, and we're going to have to see how all of this is going to now start to arc back in, and this idea of Hashem Tzil Chayat Minacha, God is the reflection of us, and that's how He runs His world and His Olamas. That the Kruvim clearly are saying how you behave is how God behaves back. That's for sure. So you face directly to God, God face directly to you. You face a bit away, God face a bit away. That's going to be the mirror for the Olamas, all the worlds, as to how they're going to work. Okay, any last questions on this before we go?
Thank you.
Okay, pleasure. See you next week in Mitzvah Hashem.